The restaurant sat on the corner of a busy street, its golden light spilling onto the pavement as people hurried past with their coats pulled tight. Inside, the air smelled of roasted garlic and fresh bread. The sound of soft jazz played from the speakers, blending with the gentle clinking of glasses and quiet chatter. It was one of those places where people came to feel important, where businessmen met clients and couples celebrated anniversaries. For most of them, the night was just another evening of fine dining. But for Lena, it was another long shift she had to survive. Lena balanced a tray of steaming dishes on one hand, moving between tables with practiced grace. Her black uniform was simple but neat, her hair tied back in a low bun. She smiled politely at guests, remembered every detail of their orders, and never forgot to thank them. To the customers, she was just another waitress doing her job. None of them would have guessed that beneath her calm face lived a story far more complicated than the one her smile suggested. She had worked here for 3 years. Before that, she had jumped between jobs, a cashier, a receptionist, a helper at a bakery, but this one paid just enough to cover her rent and help her mother with the hospital bills. Every month, she sent part of her paycheck back home to the small town where her mother still lived. That money was never enough, but it was all she could manage. She told herself things would get better someday. For now, this was her life, serving strangers, listening to the hum of their laughter and pretending she wasn't tired. The restaurant staff liked her. She was quiet but kind. She never complained, even on the busiest nights when everyone else was ready to scream. If someone needed help, she stepped in. If a guest made a rude comment, she smiled and moved on. She had learned long ago that keeping her head down was the best way to survive. But there was something else about her, something few people noticed. Every now and then, when she thought no one was watching, her lips would move along to the jazz music playing softly through the speakers. Her voice never escaped her mouth, but her eyes showed the memory of sound. It was like she could still feel the rhythm inside her even after all these years. Lena used to sing, not for money, not for fame, but because it made her feel alive. She had grown up in a small house with thin walls and a cracked roof, where music was her escape. Her father had loved to listen to old records, songs full of heart and soul. He used to tell her that her voice was special, that it could make people feel something real. And he was right. When she sang, even the neighbors used to pause to listen through their open windows. But that was before everything changed. Her father's sudden illness had turned their lives upside down. The medical bills grew faster than they could handle, and when he finally passed away, the silence he left behind broke something inside her. She stopped singing the day of his funeral and hadn't sung a single note since. It wasn't that she couldn't. It was that she didn't want to feel the pain that came with it. Music had been something they shared. Without him, it felt wrong. Now, years later, she lived in a small apartment above a laundromat. Every morning, she walked to work with her earbuds in, but never pressed play. She didn't listen to music anymore. The silence felt safer. That evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. A private event had been booked for a group of well-known musicians and producers. The entire staff had been briefed. This was not just any dinner. Every dish had to be perfect, every table spotless. The manager was pacing near the entrance, double-checking the seating chart as though his career depended on it. Maybe it did. Lena, table 7 wants another bottle of the red, called one of the servers, rushing past her. Got it, she replied, grabbing the bottle from the bar and heading toward the group. The guests at table 7 were dressed in designer clothes, their laughter filling the room. They talked loudly about upcoming concerts, new albums, and names Lena only half recognized. One of them, a gray-haired man with a silver watch, was clearly the center of attention. He spoke with authority, his words sharp but confident. Everyone listened. Lena approached quietly, waiting for a pause before speaking. "Excuse me, sir, your wine," she said softly. The man gave a polite nod and smiled. "Thank you, miss." Lena poured the wine carefully, keeping her hand steady despite the weight of the bottle. When she stepped back, the man glanced up at her again. "You have a calm presence," he said casually. "Not many people do under pressure." "Thank you," she said, smiling faintly before walking away. She didn't realize that the man she had just served was one of the most respected music producers in the country. To her, he was just another guest. In the kitchen, the tension was rising. The chef barked orders, steam filled the air, and plates were flying out faster than ever. Lena moved with quiet precision, her mind focused on keeping things smooth. The event had to go perfectly. The restaurant's reputation depended on it. By 9 o'clock, the dining room was full. The air buzzed with conversation and laughter. A small stage had been set near the back where a famous tenor was supposed to perform later in the evening. Everyone was excited for it. Even the staff whispered about it during their breaks, but then the news came. "He canceled?" The manager nearly shouted into his phone. His voice carried across the room, making several servers glance his way. Lena, who was polishing glasses at the bar, looked up. The manager hung up the phone and rubbed his forehead. "The performer can't make it. He got stuck at the airport. Great." He sighed deeply, clearly panicking. "They're expecting music, and now we have nothing. This is a disaster." A few of the waiters exchanged nervous looks. One of them joked, trying to lighten the mood. "Maybe one of us should sing," he said with a laugh. The manager didn't even smile. But the joke reached the ears of a few guests who were nearby. One of them, a tall woman in a red dress, laughed and said, "That might actually be interesting. Who here can sing?" Lena felt a strange tightening in her chest. She turned away quickly, pretending to wipe down the counter. "Lena can," called one of the waitresses teasingly. "She has a beautiful voice." Lena froze. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She hadn't expected anyone to remember that. "Oh, really?" said the woman in red, turning toward the staff with curiosity. "Is that true?" Lena forced a small smile, shaking her head. "It's just a joke," she said quickly. "I used to sing a little, that's all." But the group had already grown interested. The gray-haired producer leaned back in his chair, watching her with a thoughtful expression. "Used to?" he asked. "Why not anymore?" "I just stopped," she said, keeping her tone polite but firm. She wanted to disappear. The manager looked caught between embarrassment and panic. The guests were clearly entertained by the idea, and refusing might make things awkward. "Come on, Lena," one of the waitresses whispered. "Just one song. It'll make them happy." Lena shook her head. Her throat felt tight. The thought of singing again, especially in front of strangers and such important ones, made her stomach twist. She tried to laugh it off, but the producer's voice stopped her. "Sometimes the best performances come from unexpected places," he said, his tone gentle but persuasive. "One song. That's all we ask." The whole room seemed to turn toward her. Servers paused, guests leaned in. It felt like the world had gone quiet. Lena looked down at her hands. Her palms were sweaty, her heart racing. Part of her wanted to run to the kitchen and hide. But another part, the part that remembered how it felt to sing beside her father, whispered something else. She took a slow breath. "All right," she said softly. "Just one." The guests clapped lightly, some smiling with encouragement. The manager looked relieved, though surprised. One of the servers quickly found a microphone from the small stage and handed it to her. Lena stood there, feeling the weight of it in her hands. She hadn't held one in years. The restaurant lights felt suddenly brighter, the air thicker. She could hear the low hum of conversation fading into silence as people waited. Her fingers trembled. Her mind was blank. And yet deep inside a tiny spark flickered. A memory of sound, of her father's voice telling her to sing with heart, not fear. She lifted the microphone slowly, trying to steady her breathing. The jazz track playing in the background faded out, leaving only the quiet clinking of cutlery and the faint buzz of the lights above. For the first time in years, Lena felt the music returning, not from the speakers, but from within herself. She wasn't ready to sing yet. Not tonight. But something had changed in that moment. Something had woken up. And though the night would move on, and the guests would keep laughing and eating, the small spark inside her refused to fade. The ordinary waitress had just taken the first step toward something extraordinary. She just didn't know it. Yet. The night after the event felt longer than usual for Lena. She lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling while the faint hum of traffic echoed outside. The thought of what had happened at the restaurant kept circling in her mind. She hadn't actually sung that night, but the way everyone had looked at her, the expectation, the curiosity, had stirred something deep inside her. For years she had buried her love for music, but now that tiny spark was refusing to fade. It was strange and uncomfortable, like being reminded of a dream she had tried to forget. The next morning she walked to work through the chilly air, her scarf pulled up to her chin. She stopped at the small coffee shop across the street from the restaurant and ordered her usual plain coffee. As she waited, she caught herself humming softly under her breath. It was barely a whisper of sound, but enough to make her heart race. She stopped immediately and looked around, embarrassed. No one seemed to notice. Still, she felt as if she had done something dangerous. When she got to work, the restaurant was already buzzing with energy. The manager was giving directions to the kitchen staff, while the waiters arranged tables for the lunch crowd. Everyone was talking about the previous night's event, the famous guests, the food, the canceled performance, and the moment when Lena had almost sung. "Lena, you should have done it," one of her coworkers said with a grin. "You had the whole room waiting. That could have been your big break." She smiled politely. "I'm just a waitress. Nobody wants to hear me sing." "That producer seemed to," the coworker replied. "He was watching you the whole time." Lena laughed softly, trying to brush it off, but her stomach tightened. She remembered his calm, observant eyes and the way he had spoken to her. There had been something in his tone, an understanding, maybe even belief. She shook her head and pushed the thought away. People like him lived in a different world, one she didn't belong to. The day passed as usual, with endless orders, spilled drinks, and the constant sound of cutlery clinking against plates. By evening, she was exhausted. As she clocked out, the manager stopped her near the door. "Hey, Lena," he said. "You did well last night." The guests were impressed, especially that music guy. He asked about you before he left. Her heart skipped. "Asked about me? Why?" The manager shrugged. "Said something about wanting to talk to you. I told him you were just staff, but he said he'd be back sometime." "Maybe it's good news, huh?" Lena smiled weakly and nodded, but inside she felt uneasy. She didn't want to draw attention. She had built her life around staying unnoticed, around doing her job quietly and going home. But the idea that someone had seen through that, someone important, made her feel exposed. A few days passed and life went on. The restaurant returned to its usual rhythm. The memory of that night began to blur until it felt like a strange dream. Lena focused on her work, visited her mother over the weekend, and tried not to think about music. But one Friday evening, everything shifted again. It was almost closing time when the door opened and a small group walked in. Lena recognized one of them immediately, the gray-haired producer from the private dinner. He was wearing a dark coat and a friendly smile. The manager hurried over to greet him, clearly surprised but eager to impress. "Welcome back, sir. Table for 3? "Yes, thank you," the producer said. His eyes swept the room and landed on Lena, who froze for a second before quickly looking down at her notepad. "Would you mind if she served us?" he asked, gesturing toward her. The manager blinked, then nodded quickly. "Of course. Lena, take care of our guests." Her heart pounded as she approached their table. She smiled politely, keeping her voice steady. "Good evening. Can I get you something to drink?" The producer studied her for a moment before speaking. "Coffee, please, black, and I'd like to talk to you when you have a moment." Lena hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." When she returned with the coffee, he leaned forward slightly. "I didn't get the chance to thank you the other night," he said. "You have a quiet confidence about you. Most people would have run away, but you stood there." She smiled faintly. "I almost did run away," he chuckled. "Still, you didn't. That tells me something." She didn't know how to respond, so she waited. He continued. "You said you used to sing. I could tell from the way you held yourself. You weren't afraid of the attention, you were afraid of what it meant." His words hit too close to home. Lena felt her throat tighten. "It's been a long time," she said quietly. "I stopped for a reason." "I understand," he said. "But sometimes life gives us small reminders of what we're meant to do. I think that night was one of those moments for you." Lena looked at him, unsure if she should laugh or cry. "I'm just trying to get by," she said softly. "Music doesn't pay the bills." "Maybe not yet," he said with a smile. "But I've seen enough talent to recognize the real thing. If you ever change your mind, here's my card." He placed it gently on the table before she could refuse. The card was simple, just his name, number, and a company logo. She looked at it for a moment, then tucked it into her apron pocket. The rest of the evening went by quickly. When the group left, the producer gave her a nod and said, "I'll be waiting to hear from you." After closing, Lena stood alone in the empty dining room, the chairs stacked on tables, the lights dimmed. She pulled out the card and stared at it again. Part of her wanted to throw it away. Another part wanted to call right then and there. But fear kept her frozen. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if she opened that door only to find more disappointment? That night she walked home slower than usual. The city lights glowed softly, reflecting off the wet pavement. She passed a street musician playing a saxophone on the corner. His music was smooth and full of emotion. She stopped for a moment, watching as people passed by without paying attention. The man didn't seem to care. He played for himself, lost in the rhythm. Something about that moved her deeply. When she got home, she poured herself a glass of water and sat on the edge of her bed. The producer's card sat on the nightstand. She picked it up and turned it over in her hand. The words he had said replayed in her mind. Sometimes life gives us small reminders of what we're meant to do. She sighed and placed the card back down, but she couldn't ignore the tiny voice inside her anymore. Over the next few days, she found herself humming again, softly, quietly when no one was around. In the kitchen while washing dishes on the way to work, even while waiting for the bus. Her voice felt rusty, unsure, but it was still there. Each time she sang a few notes, she felt a strange mix of joy and fear. One evening after work, she stopped by a small park near her apartment. It was quiet, with only a few people walking dogs or sitting on benches. She sat down under a tree and opened her phone. For the first time in years, she searched for one of her old favorite songs. When she played it, the familiar melody filled her ears, bringing back a rush of memories. Her father smiling, her mother cooking in the kitchen, the sound of laughter. Without thinking, she started to sing along, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger with each line. A woman walking her dog paused nearby, listening. When the song ended, she smiled and clapped softly. "You have a beautiful voice," as she said. Lena felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she replied shyly. The woman nodded. "Don't hide it. The world needs more real voices like that." Then she walked away. That night, Lena couldn't sleep again. She sat by her window looking out at the city. The card still sat on her nightstand. She reached for it and ran her fingers over the raised letters. Her heart was racing, not from fear this time, but from something else. Hope. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed the number. It rang twice before she heard the familiar, calm voice. "Hello?" "Hi," she said softly. "This is Lena from the restaurant." There was a short pause, then a warm tone. "I was hoping you'd call," she hesitated. "I don't know why I am, honestly. I can't stop thinking about singing again." "I'm glad," he said. "That's how it starts. No pressure. No promises. Just come by the studio tomorrow and we'll talk. Maybe sing a little. See how it feels." She hesitated again, but found herself nodding. "Okay, good," he said. "I'll text you the address. 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock, she repeated. After hanging up, she sat there in silence, her heart pounding. It felt unreal. She didn't know what would happen, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited about something. The fear was still there, but it wasn't as heavy anymore. As she turned off the light and lay in bed, she thought about her father. She imagined him smiling, telling her that her voice was meant to be heard. And for the first time since he passed away, she whispered a quiet promise to herself. Tomorrow, she would sing again. The morning sun filtered weakly through Lena's thin curtains, painting faint gold stripes across her small room. She had barely slept. Her mind kept replaying the moment she called the producer the night before. Now it was morning, and the promise she made to herself, "Tomorrow, I will sing again," was about to be tested. She got up earlier than usual and stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair and tying it neatly. Her hands trembled slightly. It had been years since she'd stepped into a music studio. The idea of singing in front of someone, especially someone like him, filled her with both excitement and fear. She looked at her reflection for a long moment. "You can do this," she whispered softly. She put on a simple outfit, a light sweater and jeans, and slipped the producer's card into her pocket. On her way out, she grabbed a scarf, locked her door, and headed toward the subway station. The city was already awake, with people hurrying to work, cars honking, and the smell of coffee in the air. Lena felt out of place among them, like she was walking toward something she didn't fully understand. When she arrived at the address he had texted her, she found herself standing in front of a tall glass building. A small sign near the door read Eclipse Studios. She took a deep breath and walked inside. The lobby was quiet, filled with the faint echo of distant music. A young receptionist greeted her with a friendly smile and led her down a hallway lined with framed gold records and photographs of famous artists. When they reached a studio room, the door was slightly open. Inside, the producer sat behind a soundboard adjusting a few controls. He looked up and smiled as she entered. "Good morning," he said warmly. "I'm glad you came." "Good morning," Lena replied nervously, her voice barely above a whisper. He stood and gestured toward a chair. "Please sit. Would you like some water or tea?" "Water's fine, thank you." As she sat down, he poured her a glass and slid it across the table. "You look nervous," he said with a small smile. "I am," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I've done anything like this." "That's okay," he said kindly. "We're not here to judge, just talk. And maybe if you feel ready, we'll let you sing a little. Nothing fancy. Just something that feels natural to you." She nodded, trying to relax. He asked her about her background, how she got into singing and what kind of music she loved. She told him about her father, the old records they used to listen to, and how she used to sing along every evening until one day she just couldn't anymore. He listened without interrupting, his eyes calm and understanding. When she finished, he said softly, "You know, sometimes our connection to music never truly disappears. It just waits for us to come back." Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe you're right." He stood and pointed toward a small recording booth. "Would you like to try? Just a simple song. No pressure. Think of it like singing to yourself." Her stomach fluttered. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay." She stepped into the booth. The walls were padded with soft panels and a microphone hung in front of her. Headphones rested on the stand beside it. It felt strange but also familiar, like walking into a memory. She put on the headphones and took a deep breath. Through the small window, she saw the producer watching her with an encouraging smile. "Whenever you're ready." His voice came through the headset. Lena closed her eyes. She thought about her father, the evenings filled with music, his laughter, the warmth of their tiny home. She thought about how he used to tell her, "Don't sing for applause, sing to tell the truth." The words echoed in her mind, and then, quietly, she began. Her voice started soft, almost like a whisper, uncertain at first, but as the melody flowed, something inside her unlocked. Her tone grew steadier, her emotions deepened. The song was one she hadn't sung since childhood, a slow, heartfelt tune about love and loss. The notes seemed to come from a place she hadn't touched in years. In the control room, the producer sat motionless, completely absorbed. He could feel the honesty in her voice, the way it carried pain and beauty at the same time. It wasn't polished or trained like a professional singer's voice, but it had something far more rare. Truth. When she finished, there was silence. Lena opened her eyes, her heart pounding. "Was that okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. After a long pause, he spoke through the intercom. "It was more than okay," he said quietly. "It was real." Lena smiled nervously and stepped out of the booth. Her cheeks were flushed. "I messed up a few parts," he shook his head. "Those parts made it human. You have something special, Lena. Something that can't be taught." She didn't know what to say. It felt surreal hearing those words. "Thank you," she whispered. He sat back down, glancing at the computer screen where her voice waves were displayed. "I'd like to work with you," he said. "Not to change you, but to help you find your sound again. No contracts or pressure. Just a few sessions. See how it feels." Her eyes widened. "Really? Really?" he said with a kind smile. "You have a story in your voice, and people need to hear it." Lena hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. I just got used to the idea of singing again." "That's all it takes," he replied. "One step at a time." After a few moments of silence, she nodded. "Okay, I'll try." "Good," he said. "Let's start small. I'll send you some simple songs to practice. Come back in a few days and we'll record another one." She agreed, and after thanking him, she left the studio feeling lighter than she had in years. As she stepped outside, the sun hit her face, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled to herself. The city seemed brighter. The sounds around her, the honking cars, the laughter, the music from a passing car, all felt alive again. That evening, she went straight home, made herself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. She replayed the song in her mind, remembering how it felt to let her voice out again. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. That thought filled her with quiet joy. Over the next week, Lena kept her promise. She practiced a little every day, usually in the evenings when the city quieted down. At first she was shy, afraid that someone might hear her through the thin apartment walls. But soon she stopped caring. Singing made her feel free again. Each note felt like a piece of herself returning. When she went back to the studio the following week, the producer greeted her with the same warm smile. "Ready?" he asked. "I think so," she said, clutching her small notebook where she had written a few lyrics of her own. He noticed it and asked, "Do you write songs too?" She hesitated. "Sometimes. Just little things." "Nothing special, may I see?" he asked gently. She handed him the notebook, embarrassed. He read through a few pages, his expression thoughtful. "These are beautiful," he said. "Simple but full of feeling. You write like someone who understands people." Lena blushed. "They're just thoughts." "Thoughts make the best songs," he said. "Maybe one day we'll turn these into music." That day they recorded 2 more songs. Each time Lena's confidence grew. Her voice carried more emotion, her control improved, but she never lost the raw honesty that made her special. When she sang, the room seemed to change. Even the studio assistant paused to listen. After the second recording, the producer said, "You remind me why I love music. It's not about fame or charts. It's about truth. You have that." Lena smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you for believing in me," she said softly. He shook his head. "You did that yourself. I just helped you see it." As days turned into weeks, Lena's life began to shift. She still worked at the restaurant, but something was different now. Her coworkers noticed the change too. "You've been smiling a lot lately," one of them teased. "Got a secret?" Lena laughed. Maybe. What they didn't know was that her secret was music. Every time she sang, even for just a few minutes, the world felt brighter. It became her escape from the noise of daily life, her way of breathing again. Then one evening, after another recording session, the producer looked thoughtful. "We're planning a small showcase next month," he said. "A few artists performing live for an audience. I think you should be part of it." Lena froze. "Perform? In front of people?" He nodded. "It'll be a small crowd. Industry folks, a few guests. Nothing overwhelming. But it could be your moment." Her heart raced. The thought of standing in front of an audience terrified her. "I don't know if I can." "You can," he said simply. "You already have. Remember that night at the restaurant? You didn't sing, but you had everyone waiting on one word from you. That presence doesn't just happen. It's who you are." She looked down, unsure. But deep inside, a quiet excitement began to build. Maybe he was right. Maybe she could do it. That night, as she walked home under the city lights, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in years. A sense of purpose. She thought about her father again. About how he used to close his eyes when she sang and smile as if the world had stopped. She whispered into the night, "I'm going to do it, Dad." The road ahead still scared her, but now for the first time fear didn't stop her. It fueled her, and though she didn't know it yet, the small showcase she had just agreed to would soon change her life forever. The weeks leading up to the showcase passed faster than Lena expected. Each day felt like a mix of nerves and excitement. She continued her shifts at the restaurant, but her mind often wandered to the studio. During her breaks, she would sit in the corner of the staff room humming quietly to herself. Music had slowly found its way back into her life, filling the spaces where fear used to live. Her coworkers noticed the change. She smiled more, laughed more, and even her walk seemed lighter. But when they asked what was going on, she always gave the same answer. "Just some small singing. Practice," she'd say with a shy grin. What she didn't tell them was that she would soon stand on a stage again, something she hadn't done since her father passed away. The producer checked in often, guiding her through rehearsals. Sometimes they worked at the studio, sometimes over short calls. He helped her choose a song for the performance, something simple but full of feeling. They agreed on a classic tune with soft piano and gentle rhythm, something that suited her voice's honesty. "You don't need to impress anyone," he told her one evening. "You just need to be real. That's what people remember." His words stayed with her. She practiced late into the night, often whispering the lyrics softly so her neighbors wouldn't hear. She recorded herself and listened back, noticing the little things she wanted to fix. It wasn't about perfection. It was about finding herself in the music again. The night before the showcase, Lena could hardly sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling. What if she forgot the lyrics? What if her voice cracked? What if she froze? Every doubt imaginable came rushing in. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, remembering her father's voice. Don't sing to be perfect. Sing to be true. That thought calmed her enough to finally fall asleep. The morning of the performance arrived cold and cloudy. She woke early, made tea, and sat by the window watching the city slowly come to life. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. After getting ready, she took a long look at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back didn't look like the same tired waitress she used to be. There was still fear in her eyes. But there was also strength. By the time she arrived at the small theater where the showcase was being held, the other performers were already there. Young singers, guitarists, and a few musicians chatting quietly in the lobby. The producer greeted her warmly. "You made it," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," she admitted. "Good," he replied with a smile. "That means you care." He led her backstage, showing her where to wait and introducing her to the sound technician and the pianist who would accompany her. The theater wasn't huge, but it was elegant with soft lighting and rows of cushioned seats. The audience would mostly be people from the industry, producers, artists, and music lovers. But to Lena, it felt like standing before the world. When the show began, she watched from backstage as the first few performers went up. Their confidence amazed her. Each one sang beautifully, drawing polite applause from the audience. Lena's hands grew clammy. Her turn was getting closer. Finally, she heard her name. The producer gave her a reassuring nod. "You're ready," he said quietly. She stepped onto the stage, the soft lights warming her skin. The audience was silent, their faces blurred in the dim glow. The pianist began to play the opening notes, gentle and slow. Lena took a breath, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Then she sang. Her voice came out softer than she expected at first, trembling slightly. But as the melody carried her, she began to let go. She stopped thinking about the crowd, the stage, the lights. She thought only about the song, the meaning behind each word, the memories it carried. The emotion flowed through her, honest and raw. The room grew still. The audience leaned in, drawn by the sincerity in her voice. It wasn't a performance, it was a story. When she reached the final verse, her tone softened to a whisper, barely holding back the emotion in her chest. The last note hung in the air, delicate and pure. Then silence. For a moment, no one moved. The world seemed to pause. Lena stood there, her breath shallow, unsure what had just happened. Then slowly a sound rose from the crowd. Clapping, at first gentle, then louder until the room was filled with applause. Some people stood. A few even wiped their eyes. Lena blinked, stunned. The pianist smiled at her, and the producer stood at the side of the stage, clapping with quiet pride. She bowed slightly, her heart pounding with disbelief. As she walked off the stage, her hands were shaking, but her smile wouldn't fade. Backstage, the producer met her with a wide grin. "You did it," he said, his voice full of warmth. "That was beautiful." Lena laughed breathlessly. "I thought I was going to faint." "But you didn't," he said. "You stood there and gave them your truth. That's what real artists do." She felt tears fill her eyes, but this time, they weren't from sadness. "Thank you," she whispered. After the showcase ended, a few people from the audience came to talk to her. They complimented her voice, her emotion, the way she connected with the song. One woman said, "Your voice made me feel something." That doesn't happen often. Lena didn't know how to respond. She simply smiled and said, "Thank you." Later that night, after everything was over, she and the producer sat outside the theater, sharing a quiet moment. The street was nearly empty, the air cool. "You changed tonight," he said softly. She looked at him puzzled. "What do you mean?" You walked in here as someone who doubted herself, he said. But you walked off that stage as someone who knows who she is. Lena smiled faintly. Maybe for the first time in a long while. He nodded. What happens next is up to you. But whatever you choose, remember this feeling. You earned it. She looked out at the empty street, the glow of streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. I used to think my story ended when I stopped singing, she said quietly, but maybe it was just waiting to begin again. The producer smiled. Exactly. Over the next few days, videos from the showcase started appearing online. Someone had recorded her performance, and it spread quickly among music circles. People commented on her voice, how pure and emotional it was. Some called her the singing waitress, not knowing her name, but feeling her sincerity. The restaurant, where she worked, even played a clip of her performance on the small TV near the bar, and her co-workers cheered when they saw her. You're famous, one of them joked. Lena laughed. Hardly, but thank you. The producer called her later that week. You're getting attention, he said. A few people want to meet you. Small labels, event planners. Nothing too big yet, but it's a start. Her heart leapt. That's incredible, he chuckled. I told you. People remember honesty. You have that. For the first time, Lena began to see her life differently. The restaurant wasn't her whole world anymore. It was just a part of her story. She still worked her shifts, still cared for her mother, but now she carried something new with her. Hope. One evening, she received an email from a small music charity. They were organizing a benefit concert to raise funds for young musicians who couldn't afford lessons or instruments. They invited her to perform one of her songs. The message ended with, "Your story inspired us. We'd be honored if you joined." Lena read it twice, then smiled. It wasn't about fame or success. It was about connection, about giving something back. She accepted without hesitation. On the night of the benefit concert, the hall was filled with people, students, families, and supporters of the program. When Lena stepped onto the stage again, she wasn't as nervous as before. She looked out at the faces in the crowd and thought of her father, her mother, the long nights of doubt. And then she sang, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever hidden a dream because they were afraid. Her voice soared, warm and full of life. The audience listened in silence, and when the song ended, they rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Lena felt tears run down her cheeks, but she was smiling through them. She realized something powerful in that moment. She wasn't afraid anymore. After the show, as people congratulated her, she stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The sky was full of stars and the city lights glowed below. She thought of her journey, the long hours at the restaurant, the grief she had carried, the moment she almost turned away from music forever. All of it had led her here. She whispered softly into the cool night air, "Thank you, Dad." The sound of laughter drifted from inside the hall, and she turned back with a peaceful smile. She didn't know what the future would hold. More stages, more songs, maybe even challenges. But she was ready for it all, because she had found her voice again. And this time, she wasn't going to let it fade. The weeks after the benefit concert were filled with moments Lena could hardly believe were real. Every morning when she woke up, she checked her phone and found new messages waiting, people reaching out, journalists asking for interviews, small event organizers inviting her to sing. It was as if the world had suddenly discovered her. Her mother was the happiest of all. Each evening she'd sit in her favorite chair, scrolling through the comments under Lena's videos. "They love you," she'd say, her eyes shining with pride. "See what happens when you believe in yourself?" Lena would smile softly. "I'm just lucky," she'd reply, though deep down she knew it was more than luck. It was the courage to try again. One day the producer called with news that took her breath away. "There's a charity gala happening downtown next month," he said. "It's a big one. Industry people, business leaders, even a few celebrities. They want you to perform." "Me?" she asked, stunned. "At that kind of event?" "Yes, you," he said, chuckling. You earned this. They saw your video from the benefit concert and were moved by your story. They want authenticity, not perfection. You have that." For a moment, she was speechless. The thought of standing before such an audience scared her, but it also filled her with a quiet excitement. This was more than a performance, it was a chance to tell her story through song. In the weeks that followed, Lena poured her heart into preparing. She chose a song that meant something to her, a gentle ballad about hope, loss, and finding light again. Every note carried a piece of her journey. The producer helped her refine it, guiding her but always reminding her, "Don't chase the sound. Let it come from your heart." She practiced in the evenings after work, humming softly while cleaning tables or waiting for the last guests to leave. Her co-workers often stopped to listen. "You're gonna make it big," one said. "Don't forget us when you're famous," Lena laughed. "I could never." As the night of the gala approached, her nerves began to build. She tried to stay calm, but the thought of performing in front of such an important crowd made her stomach twist. The morning of the event, she sat with her mother, sipping tea in silence. "You'll be wonderful," her mother said softly. "Just be you. That's what people love." Lena nodded, taking her hand. "I wish Dad could see this." "He does," her mother whispered. "He's watching every step you take." Those words stayed with her all day. That evening, the city sparkled with lights as sleek cars pulled up in front of the grand hotel where the gala was held. The lobby shimmered with chandeliers, and waiters moved gracefully through the crowd with trays of champagne. Lena arrived in a simple but elegant dress, nothing too fancy, but enough to make her feel confident. Backstage, she could hear the hum of conversation and laughter from the hall. The producer met her there, offering a reassuring smile. "You ready?" he asked. "Almost," she said, taking a deep breath. "I can't believe this is happening," he grinned. "Believe it. You've earned every second." As the event went on, the host introduced speakers and performers. Each act received polite applause, the kind that comes from a well-mannered audience. But when it was finally her turn, something shifted in the room. The lights dimmed, and the host's voice echoed through the hall. "Please welcome a rising voice whose story has touched many, Lena Morales." The sound of her name sent a shiver down her spine. She stepped out under the soft glow of the stage lights. The audience, a sea of elegant faces, fell silent. The pianist began to play the opening notes, gentle and slow. Lena closed her eyes for a brief moment, centering herself. Then she began to sing. Her voice floated through the hall, tender and pure. The words carried emotion that no microphone could hide. She wasn't performing, she was sharing. Every note was a memory, every line a piece of her truth. She thought of her father, her long nights at the restaurant, and the courage it had taken to stand here again. Halfway through the song, she felt the energy in the room shift. The chatter stopped completely. People leaned forward, eyes fixed on her. Even those used to hearing the world's best voices seemed captivated by her honesty. It wasn't about range or power. It was about heart. As she reached the final verse, her voice softened to a whisper, fragile, yet strong. The last note hung in the air like a secret only the music could tell. Then silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. The quiet stretched so long that Lena wondered if something had gone wrong. But then the applause began, soft at first, then thunderous. People stood clapping and cheering. Some wiped their eyes. A few shouted her name. Lena stood there overwhelmed. She felt her heart swell with emotion. Tears blurred her vision, but she was smiling through them. The pianist smiled back at her, nodding with quiet pride. When the music faded and she walked off the stage, the producer was waiting. "You did it again," he said, his voice low but full of admiration. "You moved them." Lena laughed softly, still catching her breath. "I didn't expect that reaction." "You shouldn't be surprised anymore," he said. "This is what happens when someone sings from the soul." After the gala, people lined up to speak with her. They thanked her for her performance, for the emotion she brought. Some wanted her to perform at their events. Others simply wanted to shake her hand. Lena listened, humbled by every word. Later that night, when everything was over, she stood outside the hotel, the cool night air brushing her face. The city lights glittered across the skyline. She thought back to where she had started, carrying trays, cleaning tables, hiding her voice out of fear. Now she stood here, not as a waitress, but as a singer who had touched hearts. The producer joined her, standing quietly for a moment before speaking. "You know," he said, "tonight reminded me why I do this. You reminded everyone what real music feels like." Lena smiled. "Thank you for believing in me." He shook his head. "You did the hard part. You believed in yourself." They stood there in silence for a while, watching the lights of the city move like stars. For Lena, it wasn't about fame anymore. It wasn't about being recognized or applauded. It was about connection, the invisible thread between her voice and the hearts of those who listened. In the days that followed, her story spread even further. News outlets called her performance the highlight of the night. A short video clip of her song circulated online, gathering millions of views. People from around the world left comments. Some inspired, others simply moved. "She sings like she's lived every word," one wrote. Another said, "This is what music is supposed to be." Despite all the attention, Lena remained humble. She continued visiting the restaurant from time to time, not to work but to see her friends. They still teased her, joking about having a celebrity among them. She always laughed and reminded them she was just the same person. Her life slowly began to change in ways she had never imagined. She was invited to collaborate with musicians she had once admired from afar. She recorded her first single, a song inspired by her journey, a song about rediscovering one's voice. It wasn't flashy or overproduced. It was simple, heartfelt, and true. When it was released, the response was overwhelming. People connected with it because it felt real. Messages poured in from listeners who said her music helped them through hard times. Some said they found courage to chase their own dreams. Each message reminded Lena of why she had started singing again in the first place. Months later, she stood backstage at a large theater, her first solo concert. The crowd outside waited eagerly, the seats filled with faces of people who had followed her story from the start. Her mother sat in the front row, tears already in her eyes. Lena took a deep breath, holding the microphone close to her chest. "From the restaurant to this stage," she whispered to herself. "Who would have thought?" When she stepped onto the stage, the applause that greeted her was deafening. She smiled, feeling both humbled and grateful. As she began to sing, she felt that same spark she had felt the first night at the restaurant, the same honesty, the same heart. Her voice carried through the hall, warm and powerful. She sang of hope, love, and the beauty of never giving up. The audience swayed with her rhythm, some singing along, others simply closing their eyes and listening. When the final song ended, the crowd rose in unison, clapping, cheering, calling her name. It was everything she had once dreamed of, but now it meant something deeper. It wasn't just about success, it was about healing, connection, and truth. After the concert, as she stood alone for a moment backstage, Lena thought about her journey. She remembered the nights of doubt, the fear of failure, the moment she almost turned away from music forever, and she smiled. Every struggle had led her here. She walked out to the empty seats after everyone had gone, sat down on the edge of the stage, and looked out into the silence. "Thank you," she whispered again, this time not just to her father but to life itself for giving her a second chance. She had learned that dreams don't fade. They wait. Sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully. But when you find the courage to reach for them again, they come back brighter than ever. Lena had found her voice, her purpose, and her peace. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she knew one thing for sure. She would never stop singing again.